What I enjoy from history is how often nations, people, companies end up, well, to use the old phrase, reinventing the wheel. To be honest, that's because there are good reasons for why you did something a certain way, and so doing it again makes sense. The Japanese have, for the last few years, I'd argue, especially since the Congo class of destroyers, have fallen into an old habit which served them well almost, well, now 130, 140 years ago. They fall into a habit which was a very, very smart play when they did it before, and it's a very smart play doing it now. It is. It's a smart play. And I'm going to be talking about the Maya class today, because these are some really cool ships. They're in many ways the best of the Arleigh Burkes. And it's fun we sort of talk about that because people are going to go, well, the Mayas, they only look like Burkes, they're not Arleigh Burkes. They are sort of. We'll explain as we go through. We'll explain as we go through. And it's not just Japan which is following this policy, but other nations which are following this policy have differing reasons, and so honestly I'll talk about them in their own videos at certain points. And I know I've done a couple of videos recently in the key ships which have been on modern ships, but sometimes in some of the modern classes there's some great historical parallels to bring up, and that's the case in the Maya class realistically. There is a lot of history to parallel with them. You see, the Japanese in the 1880s, 1890s have the 6-6 fleet plan. And what they basically did in that plan, and fought through on that plan, was we can't afford to build enough ships to match in or overmatch anyone. We can't. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the best class being built by a major power. We're going to find the best class being built by a major power. And we're going to get them to build basically the ship they'd build if they weren't building a big class system. What does that mean? Well, let's put it this way. If you take Mikasa here, which was based on the Formidable class to an extent, and if you, when I say to an extent, largely, and you went, actually what I'd like to do is I'd like to build 8 Mikasas for the Royal Navy rather than the 8 Formidables. That's going to cost the same as building 10 ships. So, the Royal Navy has a real problem there. You see, the Mikasa might not be that much more expensive than the Formidable, but every bit adds up. Here's the thing, which is more useful for the Royal Navy? Specifically, they could buy 6 Mikasas or 8 Formidables. Which is more useful in terms of force generation for the Royal Navy, which has to think about operating around the world? It's the 8 ships. Every single time it's the 8 ships. Because there isn't enough differential one-on-one between these two to realistically justify building this for the Royal Navy. When you can get 8 or 6, or you buy 8 and it's going to be, you buy 8 of these, that's going to 10 or even possibly 11 of these. Works out about 10 point. And the trouble is there are differing metrics for how we judge the sums because of how they bought ships in those periods and what bits are made public and what bits aren't. So it works out between buying 8 of these would be equivalent to between 10 and 11. Technically it's 10.49 ships. the Royal Navy prefer to be building the next 2 ships of the next class than spending that money on buying that many Micassas. Because that's the other thing. The Royal Navy's ordering by 8, and they will be buying a lot of them. The Japanese are ordering them in pairs or single. For the Japanese, though, we're making every individual ship count, adds weight to their capability and their argument, and really doesn't matter with the size of their fleet, especially when you consider their force generation is about local defense, about providing enough force within their local area that anyone who wants to send something to oppress Japan has got to deal with it. It makes sense. And what's even better is that everyone knows this is based on this. And they know how good this is because it's the battleship of the premier navy in the world. So this is a tweaked, slightly better version of this. Which means whilst you might let your ego assuage you and go, well, you know, the Japanese, their sailors aren't as good as Western sailors. Their sailors aren't as good as our navies. You're not going to sit there and go, well, their ships are terrible. Because they're an improved Royal Navy ship. And the Royal Navy is the benchmark navy. So in other words, their ships are better than, individually, better than the Royal Navy's. Although the fact is the Royal Navy would turn up to a fight with like 20 of them, and the Japanese would turn up with like 6 battleships and 6 armoured cruisers. That's where the Royal Navy's superiority lies. The Royal Navy, that's why also the Royal Navy doesn't care. Oh goody, you've built the Mikasa. It's slightly better than the Formidable. One-on-one. We're turning up with 8 Formidables. How many ships? We've got more in this class than your entire battle fleet. This is the point. The Royal Navy don't care about it because there's the numbers they're bringing. For Japan, though, the level, the status, all these things matter. And for other powers who maybe aren't building as many as the Royal Navy, it becomes something they have to think about. It becomes something they have to put some thought into. And in the modern world, what do we have? Well, the USNR have built 47 Flight IIA Arleigh Burkes. And I know they're starting on the Flight Freeze. I don't think the next class of Japanese large surface combatant, the ballistic missile defense ships, which are currently under construction, are going to be based on the Flight Freeze. I don't think that's where they're coming in. I'd be really interested if, when we get to Japan, we get to see them. I'd be really, really interested into seeing that class and looking at those ships and looking at their designs. And I'm trying to make sure we do have some abilities to meet up with and spend time with the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force to have some chats, because they have got some really interesting designs going on. But still, the equivalent of these, the equivalent of the Myers, was the Flight 2s, not the Flight 2As, not the Flight Freeze. That's what lines up with them. And realistically, if you're looking at this, the USN are building 47 of this. If they were trying to match Myers, or trying to build Myers instead, well, their budget's just shrunk. Because again, building them under American costs and American expenses, their budget has shrunk. They're not able to buy 47. For the Americans, the advantages of the Meyer class design do not add up to enough to make it to justify the cost increase per unit. That doesn't allow you to have enough numbers. For the Japanese, it does. Now, there are some problems in it. There are some negatives in this. If you're a power like France or Britain or Italy, etc., who are in many ways trying to use distinctiveness to sell yourself and sell your international presence and your naval power, the odds are you don't want to do this. You don't want to start taking on someone else's design and modernizing it, upgrading it, modifying it. And that's a perfectly legitimate policy. Because for you, you want people to realize when you're there that you are there. For the Japanese, in their circumstance, kind of like when there was the Anglo-Japanese Naval Treaty going on, with the American-Japanese Treaty going on, the idea is they turn up, they look to an extent close enough to the Americans, or close enough to the British did historically, that you're going to worry if you make a mistake, you might find yourself accidentally picked a fight with the Americans or the Brits. That's a problem in their relative periods, okay? And that's a useful thing for the Japanese. That's a useful thing. It also means, to an extent, if they're working with their ally, ship recognition is slightly easier to hopefully prevent some of the blue-on-blues. They're not exactly the same, but there's enough similarity going on, and what's really fun is when you start looking at the flight freeze and the stats around their design. And the fact is that you can almost tell some of the decision-making going into the Maya and the Maya class was literally, okay, we can go for that tech, that tech, that tech. Why? Because we're prepared to pay this price point, because we're only building 2, and we want them to be as good as they can possibly be. Whereas for the Americans, it was a case of going for that price point too much, and the Flight 2s, even the Flight 2A technological inserts, it was too much. But now with some of the Flight 3s coming through, the tech's going into them, because the tech has got cheaper. And so therefore the price point has changed, the cost balance has changed. And that's a lot of what we're talking about when talking about ship design, because one of the things that defines ships these days is not just the naval architecture, it's the systems architecture. In many ways, you're almost taking a whole set of systems and building a hull around it. You're taking a whole set of ideas of operation, of crewing, of weaponry, and you are building a hull and facility out around it. That's what you're doing. It provides you with some great capabilities. It really does. In this case, it provides us with the Maya class. And their capability, I would say, is pretty much second to none. And I know someone's going to bring up the Sejong the Great class. I realize someone is going to bring up them and going to go, but surely they're the most powerful of the Burke-style vessels. And they are a really capable asset. Please do not get me wrong on it. The Sejong the Greats are basically a Burke. If you take it and go, I want to fit it with all the missiles, and someone looks at you and goes, which missiles? And you go, all of them. I want to fit all the missiles. Batch 2 dropped that a little bit, but Batch 1 basically were all the missiles. All the missiles. A nice 128 cells. And 16 anti-ship missile systems. It's a capable thing in the Sejong the Great. But the thing is, the Mayas, they're built for taking a lot of missiles and more. In fact, they turn up with 96 cells. So they are definitely not wanting. And they have their own anti-ship missiles, and a lot of other things going on. In fact, this is one of the things which makes them so interesting. And this is another area, I have to admit, where the Japanese have added value to an existing system, where they've added systems in that make it work better for them, that give it an offset advantage versus the Arleigh Burke Formidable. Formidable as the Arleigh Burke may be, formidable as the Formidable class were, Mikasa had offset advantages compared to them, so does the Maya compared to the Flight IIA Arleigh Burke. It's a similar system. It's an ANSPY-1DV multifunctional radar, it's an ANSPY-9B surface search radar, 3 of the AN/SPG 62 illuminators, an AN/SQQ 89 with SQS 53C also helping out, and a Mark 46 optical sight system. These things, they are fairly standard. In fact, if you go look at an Arleigh Burke equivalent, they'll have pretty much the same kit. What the Japanese have is they've gone, right then, so this system works well. Right, we're going to have the SM2s, we're going to have the SM3s, we're going to have the SM6, standard missiles for air defense. That's great. We're also going to have the Type 7 ASROC. And we are going to have the Type 97, Type 12 torpedoes, maybe instead of the Mark 46. And we're going to have 8 Type 17 anti-ship missiles in 2 quad canisters. Now, these are the interesting things where the Japanese have gone and made their own to fill in. The American air defense system, great. They've gone and taken that. They've gone, we want an ASROC system. We want an ASROC system. Now, the thing is, their ASROC system was brand new as of 2007. So it's merely 18 years old, which in terms of modern missile systems is a baby. An absolute baby. It carries either a 97 or a Type 97 or a Type 12 torpedo. It's got a 2-stage solid fuel rocket, and its range is 30 kilometers. Why do you have this? Why have this as well as regular torpedoes? Well, because they only have a single helicopter aboard. They have a single helicopter. And I, myself, consider this the absolutely most sensible thing you can do. Honestly, the fact that more navies don't have them worries me. Because if you have only a single helicopter, and you're out doing an escort, and maybe you have multiple ships and multiple and each of them have their own helicopters. Well, do you pull a helicopter from another area to go and assist with prosecution if it runs out of torpedoes, risking it missing something in its area? Do you send the alert helicopter at that to provide assistance and engage? It's an option, but that means now you have to keep a helicopter on alert status. And so you can't maximize your capabilities actually in the air patrolling. So for many powers, especially those who don't have large carrier air groups with large amounts of anti-submarine warfare helicopters aboard them, I think having ASROC, anti-submarine air rocket-assisted systems to launch torpedoes a long way away from the ship makes a lot of sense. Because if they are losing a submarine, or they're at risk of losing contact with a submarine 30 kilometers away from me, that is getting very close to kill range with that submarine's own torpedoes. I'm very happy to drop some torpedoes from my ship into the waters near there. I'm very happy to have the ability for my helicopter to go, small issue here, old chap. We've dropped 2 torpedoes. Somehow, not sure how, they've managed to dodge them. These are the targeting details. Okay, fine. We'll fire 3 then. Have them drop in all around it. Watch them try and dodge that. Because which is easier for me to replace? Some very nice rocket-assisted torpedoes, or a new ship? I'd rather be using up the rocket-assisted torpedoes. It makes sense to me. And it makes sense to the Japanese. It adds them the capability they need for this scenario. And then you add in the Type 17 missiles, which in future versions will have a range of up to 1,000 kilometers, maybe further. That's 540 nautical miles or 621 miles. Which is an interesting system because it came to service in 2015, so it was actually first produced in 2012, which is the same year the Naval Strike Missile came into service. And Naval Strike Missile, of course, is the Norwegian-produced weapon system, which is being used by many navies. Many navies have adopted it, and it has a great range, great capability, but its range is greater than 300 kilometers. That's what it's posted as. What's the difference going on here? Why, again, are the Japanese going solo? Why do they need something which has 1,000 kilometers of strike range upon enemy ships? Well, these instances in the Pacific are always fun. And considering the number of islands and positions which you might find yourself operating around, if you're the Japanese Navy, you might well want to hit something from a long way away. There's also the scenario that the Japanese, whilst they do presume that in any major conflict they will likely be supported by American carrier assets, makes sense, any major conflict they are likely to end up there, there is proportionally potentially going to be a grey zone period where they might need to act alone, where they might need to have a long-range strike capability. And, especially prior to the entry in service of the F-35B in large numbers in the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, or rather with them, they need all the strike range they can get. They do, and even when they do get those aircraft in service, how many flight decks are they going to have? It's the same problem the Royal Navy currently has. Multiples of 2 were a great idea when wars were wars of choice and peace was going to be the certainty and you were only building against the most unforeseen circumstances. But even in the Maya class, there's only 2 of them in this class. The Japanese have got, I would say, 8 good destroyers in service, which is useful. 8 good destroyers is always a useful thing to have, but, and this is the real problem for the Japanese, as good as those destroyers are, as good as their capability in the Congo, the Otago and the Maya classes are, that's only 8 ships. It's not 6-6. And that's the really interesting thing. If you start going back in time, you look at why were the Japanese 6-6 to guarantee the availability of 4 and 4. Guaranteed, no matter what happens, no matter what, they would have 4 of each available. You have 8 destroyers. How many can you guarantee the availability of? 4? Probably. 4 probably. That's not as helpful, is it? That's about half your force. It's not 2/3 of your force. And this is what we are seeing a lot in these forces. You know, the Japanese have maximized the individual capability of the ships. It's got 2 phalanx on it. It's got all these different decoys and systems on it. And that's a great thing. And a great capability to have, and it's a beautiful power system. This is a far more efficient power system than is actually in the Arleigh Burkes. We'll lead up to one side, but because if the Americans go with an fully upgraded power system, then honestly they have to start doing a lot of changes inside the hull. So it's always it's an improved. It's not a bad power system, but it's not as good as it could be. With the Japanese, they have made ships which are as good as they can make them. As good as they can make them. They haven't made enough. None of the Western navies have made enough. No navy actually has enough. The Chinese Navy is working on having enough, and their ships recently have shown that they were, if you're not sure when this video comes out, it's being recorded not long after destroyer and Coast Guard vessel decided to have a very, very violent kiss while trying to pincer a Philippine Coast Guard vessel. And now everyone's trying to blame everyone for it. I'm still not quite sure how the fact that it's almost, when I see the Chinese complaints on that, it's kind of like they're complaining the Philippines, that's unsportsmanlike behaviour! You got out the way, so we bashed into each other instead of bashing into you! What were you expecting? I was going to sit there and become a People's Liberation Army, Navy, and People's Liberation Coast Guard sandwich. I don't feel like being that filling if I'm the Philippine Coast Guard. I don't want to be. I'm sorry. But again, this is the scenario, this is the background to what the Japanese are doing. Why are they building the ships they are? But they still don't have enough. They don't have enough. But shameless book plug time. So believe it or not, these videos are supposed to be 25 minutes long. I try. I try regularly to make them 25 minutes long. They rarely are. But anyway, this is a shameless book plug where I say thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, helping the channel, supporting it to grow, all those things. It really does make it work, make it possible. This channel is always about history, but I like to... My PhD is War Studies. And that's what I did my PhD in at King's College London War Studies Department, which meant I taught up to current events. And I tend to look at history as this big sweeping thing, and I like to look at the details of the sweep and how it goes on, but I also like to look at the whole flow. And sometimes, as with these videos recently I've done on the Zamort class and this, on the Maya class, I'm looking at the current events, but I'm trying to give you the historical take on why these nations are doing this, why there's this going on, what's happening. And I hope you find it interesting. We're going to get into now their current service, what they've been up to. But the thing is, I will say this before we begin this, the Maya class were only commissioned in 2020 and 2021. They haven't been around a long time. We're going to do a bit of a talk about how they got built, what was the thoughts going through their construction, but they haven't been in service for a long time. So they're still babies as far as ships go. I wish the Royal Navy had some destroyers that young in service. I really wish they did. But that's a personal bête noire. That is a personal bête noire. Now, the Japanese concept of operations, realistically, all comes down to three things. Territorial integrity, sea lines of communication, and strategic depth. Japan has no strategic depth. You land in Japan, you're into Japan's heartland in terms of its population, in terms of its industrial activity. That is straight on the coast. They have a mountainous interior, and it's a beautiful country. It is a gorgeous country. I'm very much looking forward to going there and seeing, hopefully, a lot of the country, as well as a lot of the Pacific while I'm there, as well as the East China Sea, etc. But it is no depth. No depth at all. Sea lines of communication? Well, as a maritime trading nation, which is heavily dependent upon the preservation of global maritime trade, specifically its own access to global maritime trade, and information exchange going via undersea cables, yes, this matters. Having the freedom of seas matters to Japan. It also matters to another nation I could think of which would fit those criteria, but we'll leave that to one side. And then, on top of that, you have Japan's own territorial integrity. There are island disputes going on with Russia. There are island disputes going on with other nations as disputed ownership of islands. Over whether or not the fact that, well, we've owned it for the last 1,000 years, but we owned it for the 1,000 years before that, so it's really ours, really matters. Apparently you can't just go with the old, well, we're the ones who own it today, the people are happy with it, and so that's it settled. Apparently no. The fact that they lost it 1,000 years ago can still be something of contention and pain. I don't know. History is one of those things. It can be both a learning exercise and help us avoid failures and fault and mistakes. It can also be a reason we keep falling into the same ruts. But realistically, they also come about because they need to replace the Hatakaze class. They were Japan's last Tartar-equipped destroyers. And they've been Japan's best Tartar-equipped destroyers. They've really been absolutely gorgeous ships for the Japanese Navy and had done really, really well. This meant that the Maya class would have big shoes to fill. So it could be argued that the Japanese were not just looking for new destroyers, they were not just looking for something which was going to fit into their defense model, fit into their security model. They were not just looking for extra ships, they were looking for replacements for ships which had been, for much of their period, de facto flagships of the IJM. And that's big shoes to fill. That is really big shoes to fill. And the Maya class were chosen for this. They were designed for this. They were designed to fill those roles. And again, this explains some of the differences between them and the Japanese choice in design and the baseline Arleigh Burke. It does explain some of the evolutions that take place in these designs and how they're fitting them out, because what they're looking for is something to fit what they need. The capability they need. I will say, the thing I'm always consistently surprised by, especially looking through the concept of operations, looking through what they were wanting for them to be, that there's no Japanese-made adaptation of the Ottomalera 76mm Super Rapide, or 3-inch gun. It would just seem to fit with all the things they're talking about in terms of diplomatic standing, presence, all these missions. It would seem a natural fit to have had a couple of those mounts, a couple of those guns, probably positioned waist in the center, one on either side, about there, to provide extra protection, extra presence, and the ability for a more graduated warning shot, especially for grey zone conflicts. The fact they use a integrated electric propulsion system for these ships, and the way they combined it into a combined gas turbine electric and gas turbine, really provided for a very capable low speed and high speed system that was very efficient. Now, the system didn't come from nowhere. No, they'd been developing it already in... Well, the Japanese have two levels of destroyers. They have what are the Kongos, the Otagos, and the Maos, which are their big destroyers. Their big stator ships probably would be called cruisers in any other navy, but this is the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. And then below that, they have some general-purpose smaller destroyers, which are usually... Well, in the case of the Murasame class, they are between 4,500 to 6,000 tons standard. By the time you get to the SI class, they are between 5,000 tons and 6,800 tons in the sort of standard, the full load. There is a difference going on here. This class, after all, we're talking about are about 10,000 tons fully loaded. Now, the Japanese build the smaller destroyers, as they call them, to act as their escorts. Their escorts for their larger ships. And this is why they have a guided missile destroyer level, Kongo Otagama, and then they have destroyer, general purpose destroyer. And then below that they have destroyer escorts and frigates and all the things that they're building below that. They have a very much a graduated system of escorts and vessels going on. Again, it's getting rather close to that old 8-8 fleet idea of 8 full-flat destroyers, and, well, in the case of the Japanese, I think currently they have 20 of their lighter destroyers. So they have 28 air defense vessels in total. 8 which are their large principal land attack vessels, their principal ships they're building their fleet around, and a further 20 that can sort of assist them in various ways, escort them. Although those vessels are also supposed to be escorting things like the Hyuga class air defense, Hyuga class helicopter destroyer, etc. Which makes sense. It makes sense that you need to escort these vessels. All their destroyers are similarly, to an extent, based Lesser and greater on the Arleigh Burkes, but they're all good ships. However, this again breeds into the concept of operations for the ship. As I said, it is a flagship, not just a Navy flagship, but it is going to definitely be a task force flagship. It is going to be a status element in your force. It is going to be the big ship which you are expecting people to look at for its leadership. And again, that affects the looks you're going for. One of the things that strikes me about this design is the way the shaping has gone a similar pathway as they went with the Daring class destroyers in the Royal Navy in the late 1940s, early 1950s. Now, admittedly, in this case, they'd use the argument of, oh, that's the best way for the SPY radars. That is the best way for the, the phased array flat radars, and it is. I can't argue. I wouldn't argue against that. But the fact that it turns into such a striking shape profile, such a stark, tall, imposing, proud shape profile, really does help with the diplomacy presence, doesn't it? Really does help with their status. And so let's consider their service. And just to clarify, because I didn't really count the Asagari class, and I probably should, they're currently being replaced by the Megami class, which are of course frigates, so that's why I didn't count the Asagari class in their destroyer numbers. And, there's various things going on, but even without the Asagari class, yes, the Japanese Navy do have more destroyers in service than the Royal Navy has escorts in total, by a healthy margin, and that's before we get on to the fact that the Japanese currently maintain in service somewhere in the region of 23 submarines, 23 SSKs, diesel attack submarines. They have 4 of their helicopter destroyers, of which 2, the Ismo class, are being converted into able to carry F-35Bs. And yes, they have a very great range of capabilities. They currently have 8 Megamis in service, commissioned, and they have another 5 ordered, although that's of course the class they've just sold some designs to the Australians, and they're building more for them. And they also have the Awakuma class, which are also being replaced as their destroyer escorts being replaced by the Megamis. Basically, the IJN are starting to maneuver to what we would call a destroyer frigate navy rather than a destroyer escort navy, which makes sense again for their role they're seeing themselves expanding into. I wouldn't be surprised if you see another class of very large destroyers come in. Or they might actually admit to their cruisers at some point. They might, but we'll leave that to one side. So we've got the Maya class service. Now, there is another reason I really like this class, and I will put this up there now. We all share a special date. You see, the Maya was commissioned on the 19th of March 2020, and the Haguru was commissioned on the 19th of March 2021. And I was hoping they were going to be considered a birthday present for Moi. But apparently the Japanese Navy didn't feel that, well, the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force didn't feel that was appropriate. But, it was the right day. It would have been the correct day, and it would have been nice for me to have one of these as my personal yacht to wander around. There are many things I could fix with one of these. But leaving that to one side, they actually do some really serious diplomatic signalling, and have been involved in it from the get-go. In November 2022, Maya fired an SM-3 Block 2A missile, i.e. the anti-ballistic missile and anti-satellite capable missile system which comes with the standard missile range. And it intercepted a target outside the atmosphere, and this was the first missile launch done by such a missile done by a Japanese warship. On the 18th of November, that's 2 days later, Haguru fired an SM-3 Block 1B missile to also hit another target outside the atmosphere. Both these test firings were done at the Pacific Missile Range Facility on Kauai Island, Hawaii, working with the US Navy and the US Missile Defense Agency. So it's important for signaling for Japan in terms of its ballistic missile defense and its safety. We do this, we've got this capable missile. It's also signaling with the Americans we can be part of the integrated joint system, joint allied system for this. And it's also signaling to any participants, well, look at how close we are together. We're not only using the same systems, we're actually using each other's test facilities. This is how closely integrated we are. And those tests were critical to validate the capabilities of this class and the presence of this class. These vessels are, for Japan, they have stepped straight into that role, as I talked about, of taking over from the Hatakaze class in terms of the presence mission, in terms of being Japan's premier hello. I'm the visible reason visible in personification of Japan's find out phase. Please don't. Please don't. The thing is, you don't want your submarines to be invisible. If your submarines have to be your visible part of your find out phase, then you have got to the point at which you are literally doing find out very, very soon. Because that's the only reason you should be giving away that kind of knowledge and capability. I.e., it's got very much down to the wire, and it's a last-ditch effort to try and prevent these things. So for Japan, these vessels are it. They are their presence. You combine them into a task group with a Hyuga class, an Izumo class. You add in some of their other escorts, maybe a Kongo or one of the other guided missile destroyers, and suddenly you've got a very powerful task force forming up. Something which people have to pay attention to, have to listen to. Because the only ones who are going around toting more powerful task force than that are US Navy. And that's because of what they're building their task forces around, not because of their ships. The ships are good, but their ships are the mass production version. The one you need to produce when you need to produce a dozen of the things. The Japanese ships are good, but they're the ones you can produce when you've got the budget and you know you're only going to need to build 2 of them. That's the difference. Don't you love it when a plan comes together? In the case of this class, the plan really did come together. Again, I'd liked more of them, but there isn't a single fleet wandering around the ocean these days where if I wasn't looking at a tasking list, I wouldn't say, you probably need more ships. Mostly because of the various concepts and ideologies which have affected international relations and nations' perception of defense and security matters for the last 40-ish years almost. We're in the place we are in. So there's no point complaining about that. These ships have a couple of roles to fill though. And I do think one of the roles we're going to see them filling into especially is if the next generation of ballistic missile defense ships really only does yield 2 units. If the Japanese really keep to their existing plans of just building 2 such vessels, then these vessels are the backstop for them as well. They are the, frigate, if one has an accident and one's in maintenance, these are what take over the role. Which is going to add to their value. These are vessels which are going to get more important to Japanese security, Japanese defense and safety as time goes on, as the world gets more complicated and the world gets higher risk. And that's one of the things which is often not really acknowledged when ships are being built. The idea has always been, or rather has been almost as long as I've been alive, that the world is going to get more peaceful. That the world will inevitably get nicer, get friendlier, get more straightforward, less complex, with less hard edges and less risk for friction and less, therefore, chance of all-out conflict. And the trouble is, Humans, as much as they are squidgy organic messes which get in the way of running proper computer systems and machinery, because you have to design around the ergonomics of them fitting around it, have got a lot of hard edges. Sometimes they're real, sometimes they're imagined. Sometimes the biggest roadblocks to us achieving better things are in our own heads, not in front of us. And worse, some of them are in our own hearts. And those can be the most difficult and complicated to try and maneuver around. In the case of the Maya class, there are some truly exceptional ships. I'd be really proud to have them in any navy. I really would. There is not a single navy I can think of in the world which, if you turn around and sold them, oh, by the way, you've got these brand new ships there, Maya class, would go, you know what, really, I don't think I can figure out a way to use them. I don't know. I don't think I can. No. The thing I have to say I am slightly saddened by is the fact that some of the Japanese systems which are putting in, especially to future-proof them, these ships are designed to have their railgun they're developing, and the Japanese railgun program is looking very good. One of the reasons why it's looking so good is the Japanese set realistic goals for it. They didn't expect it to be all things to all people from the get-go and the first round. That's smart. They're going a similar route when it comes to their laser defense weaponry for close-in weapon system. When our systems are going for, they are going a very smart, very sensible route of let's be realistic. Let's set goals which are achievable and attainable. Achieve them, attain them, and then use the information we're gaining from doing these things and operating these things to improve, evolve. And I'd argue that's also what went on with this class. They start off with their Burke adaptations with the Congos. Then you have the Otargos. And you have the various smaller adaptations. As I said, the smaller destroyer classes coming through, which they all have a very much a Burke flavouring to their design. And the reason for that is twofold. As said, they are basing it off an existing very high quality design that they can then improve upon. And two, they're using similar systems. And when you're using the same systems or similar systems, they're going to dictate your system architecture. Because those systems have to be set up in a certain way. They do. And so these ships are products of all of that. And the Japanese got some very good ships. I'm unsurprised to see that people are now, in the case of Australia, are buying the Mangamis. I have a feeling, as time goes on, and as more people look at Japan seriously, there are going to be more and more link-ups. I would not be surprised, in fact, I think it would probably be the best model the British could go down, is if there could be something made whereby the Type 83 program could be a Anglo-Japanese program. Considering we are both looking at large destroyers in about the same period. Because the Japanese are looking at, well, potentially replacing their Congos, which are, by the way, a decade older than the Type 45s. The four Congo class destroyers were built between 1990 and 1998 and commissioned from 1993. The Type 45s were built between 2003 and 2012, and the first of them to enter commission, it was 2009. Over a decade later. 11 years later. So, yes, there is an overlap in terms of their replacement schedule, in terms of when they're going to be replaced. And that would be a really interesting thing, because for Britain and Japan, whilst there are enough differences below for frigate level and below in terms of what they're looking for in terms of their range and scope of operations, for large destroyers, there is a significant overlap. Far more significant overlap between Britain and Japan than between Britain and France or Britain and Italy. That might seem strange, but that's the reality of it. When you're looking at nations, when you're looking at who to build with, sometimes people go with proximity. They go, well, they're our next door neighbour, so they must have similar interests to us. They don't. They don't. And for Japan, it's similarly looking around. What they want from a large destroyer is not what most of their other neighbours want from a large destroyer. The problem would be that the British would want to design something distinctive, which is going to be distinctly, this is a Royal Navy ship, this is a vessel from Britain. And Japan will probably be looking at the DGX and the successor American programs and doing a similar response as they did with the Congos. They're probably going to look at them and go, what can we take from this design as our baseline and then make a better version of? That's going to be the difficulty. Navigating whether that's a viable path for either nation. Because, also, the other problem is, Britain prefers to go with a different radar system. That can be dealt with, though, and can be worked around. That can be adapted around, and honestly, I would love to see the day when they implement the successor to Samson as well as an SBY radar on the same ship. That ship would just have so much power for radar. I think it would probably be able to stop drones and most of those kind of assets by just sheer force of radar alone if they go onto full power. Just because there's so much electronics in the air, nothing's working anywhere near them. That being said, here is the question. I want you to think about what we've talked about today, and I want you to think about Japan as they're going forward. What route should they go? What route would you like to see them go on their future destroyer program? As I said, the Congos, they're starting to approach the point at which they probably need to be replaced. They probably need to be worked on, and the replacement needs to certainly be being well underway as a program now. In terms of probably a program office, a couple of dozen people, talking to each other, working it out. What do you think they should do? How do you think they should go? Do you think Japan has now reached the size where actually going for a distinctive ship that's going to be distinctly Japanese, or maybe there's a Japanese and British, it's going to be one of those two nations' ships, serves them? Or do they want to go for one themselves, or do they carry on with the vein they've been building on, the vein they've been mining? Love to hear what you think. What have we got coming up? Well, this week we had the Royal Navy's opinion on leadership at Coral Sea, Midway and Leyte Gulf. And next week we have Leadership of Liberty, the Liberty Ship Construction Program. Should be fun. And then we have Collingwood after Trafalgar. That's going to be a lot of fun. That's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you very much for watching, and hope you enjoyed. Take care. And if you liked the video, please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. And again, it's one of those things of, I don't often do modern ships. I've done a couple in a row. If you liked it, I'd love to hear your views on it, and whether you'd like to continue, whether there's ever any other classes where you're interested in history of them, please do put it below, and I'll think about it. I would like to try and react to the comments and like to take them into account, and so I'd be really interested to hear what you say. Take care.